Sarah Prescott's tired fingers gripped the worn primer as dust motes danced in the golden afternoon light, filtering through her cabin's lone window. She had been a widow for nearly 2 years now, and teaching 6-year-old Micah to read was proving to be one more impossible task in a life already overflowing with them. Sweat trickled down her temple in the oppressive heat of the Montana summer of 1876, but she pushed on, determined that her son would have what she never did in education. "Sound it out again, Micah," she encouraged, though her patience was wearing thin after an hour of the same simple words. "See a T." Micah's small face scrunched in concentration, his father's blue eyes staring hard at the page. "K-ah-ta," he said haltingly, then looked up with hope. Cat relief washed through Sarah. "Yes, that's right," she hugged him tight, his small body wriggling with pride. "You're doing so well." But the truth gnawed at her. Teaching Micah between dawn to dusk farm chores was nearly impossible. The boy needed more help than she could give, yet the nearest school was 15 miles away in Copper Creek, too far for daily travel and too dangerous to send him alone. A knock at the door startled them both. Sarah stiffened, reaching instinctively for the rifle that rested against the wall. "Stay here," she whispered to Micah, who nodded with wide eyes. Sarah approached the door cautiously. Visitors were rare at their isolated homestead and rarely brought good news. She cracked open the door, keeping her body positioned to reach for the gun if necessary. A tall man stood on her porch, hat in hand. The setting sun silhouetted his broad shoulders, and she could see the glint of a badge on his chest. "Madam," he said, voice deep and respectful. "Name's Patrick Blackwood, the new deputy marshal for the territory, just making rounds to all the outlying properties." Sarah relaxed slightly but kept her guard up. "What can I do for you, deputy?" His eyes green as summer grass took in her wary stance. "Nothing at all, madam. Just introducing myself and letting folks know I'm patrolling regularly now. There's been trouble with cattle rustlers north of here." Before Sarah could respond, Micah darted between her skirts, curiosity overcoming caution. "You a real lawman with a gun and everything?" "Micah," Sarah scolded, pulling him back. The deputy smiled, and the expression transformed his weathered face. He crouched down to Micah's level. "I sure am, young man. Deputy Marshal Patrick Blackwood at your service." He tipped an invisible hat, Micah giggled, and Sarah felt her defenses weakening despite herself. It had been so long since anyone new had spoken to them with kindness. "Would you like some water for your horse, deputy?" She found herself asking. "It's a long ride back to town." "Much obliged, madam, it is indeed." As Deputy Blackwood watered his horse, Sarah noticed him glancing at the primer book still open on the table. She hurriedly closed it, embarrassed by their humble circumstances. "Teaching your boy to read?" he asked, nodding toward the book. "Trying to," Sarah admitted. "I'm not much of a teacher myself, but I'm doing what I can." "I noticed no menfolk around," he said carefully. "Your husband?" "Died of fever 2 winters ago," Sarah replied, the familiar ache settling in her chest. "It's just Micah and me now." The deputy nodded solemnly. "That's mighty tough, madam. You've kept this place going all on your own." Pride straightened Sarah's spine. "I have, we manage." Micah piped up then. "Mama's teaching me to read, but I'm not very good yet." Deputy Blackwood glanced at Sarah, then back to the boy. His expression shifted as if making a decision. "Reading's important for a young man. Helps you make your way in the world." He hesitated before continuing. "I used to be a school teacher before I pinned on this badge." Sarah looked at him in surprise. "A school teacher?" "Yes, madam, 5 years in Illinois before I came west." He cleared his throat. "I couldn't help but overhear you working with the boy. If you'd permit me, I could offer some assistance. My patrol brings me this way twice a week." Sarah's pride warred with practicality. Micah needed more help than she could give him, but accepting charity from a stranger, a man, went against everything she'd taught herself since becoming a widow. "Let me teach him too," the deputy said quietly, seeming to sense her internal struggle. "No charge, of course, just a neighbor helping out." "We're not charity cases," Sarah said stiffly. "Never thought you were," he replied evenly. "But everyone needs help sometimes, even us lawmen." He smiled at Micah, who was watching the exchange with bright eyes. "What do you say, young man? Would you like to learn from a real school teacher?" "Yes, sir." Micah exclaimed, bouncing on his toes. "Can he, Mama, please?" Sarah looked at her son's eager face, then at the deputy's earnest expression. Something told her this man could be trusted, even if trusting didn't come easily to her anymore. "Tuesdays and Fridays," she said finally. "If it fits with your patrol, just for an hour." The deputy's smile was warm as summer. "Tuesdays and Fridays it is, Mrs. Prescott. I'll bring some proper books next time." As he mounted his horse to leave, Sarah found herself watching his straight back, the easy way he sat in the saddle. For the first time in 2 years, she felt a flicker of something other than exhaustion and worry. "Deputy Blackwood," she called as he turned his horse toward the trail. "Thank you." He touched the brim of his hat. "My pleasure, madam. See you Tuesday." True to his word, Deputy Patrick Blackwood appeared on their doorstep the following Tuesday afternoon, saddlebags bulging with books. Micah ran to greet him before Sarah could even open the door fully. "I brought something for you, young man," the deputy said, reaching into his bag and pulling out a new slate and several pieces of chalk. "Every student needs proper tools." Micah took the gifts with reverence, running his fingers over the smooth surface of the slate. "Thank you, sir." Sarah watched from the doorway, conflicted. The gifts were thoughtful and practical, but she hated feeling indebted. "You shouldn't have spent your money on us, deputy." "Had these stored away," he replied easily, though Sarah suspected it wasn't entirely true. "And please call me Patrick." Deputy feels mighty formal for a reading lesson. The hour passed quickly. Sarah worked at mending clothes while keeping an eye on the lesson, impressed despite herself by Patrick's patience and skill. He had a natural way with Micah, firm but encouraging, making the boy laugh while still keeping him focused on the task. When it was time for him to leave, Micah proudly showed Sarah how he could write his own name on the slate. "He's a quick study," Patrick said, watching the boy practice. "Got a good mind." "Like his father," Sarah said softly. "James always had his nose in a book when he wasn't working the land." Patrick nodded. "Fine legacy to pass on." He hesitated, then added, "I noticed your fence is starting to sag by the western field." "I could take a look at it on Friday if you'd allow it." Sarah stiffened. "We're managing just fine." "No doubt," he replied, unruffled by her sharp tone. "But I pass right by it on my rounds, and an hour's work now might save you days of trouble when winter comes." Before Sarah could refuse again, Micah tugged at her skirt. "Please, Mama, Deputy Patrick said he'd show me how to tie proper knots while they work." Sarah sighed, recognizing defeat. "Very well, but only if you'll stay for supper afterward. I won't have you working without compensation." Patrick's smile crinkled the corners of his eyes. "That sounds more than fair, Mrs. Prescott." "Sarah," she said, surprising herself, "if I'm to call you Patrick, then you should use my given name." "Sarah," he repeated, and something in the way he said it made her cheeks warm. Until Friday, then. Friday's lesson was followed by fence mending, which was followed by a simple but hearty supper of rabbit stew. The pattern continued through August and into September, with Patrick's visits becoming a bright spot in their isolated lives. Each time he came, he brought something useful: a book, some seeds for their garden, a tool that needed a good home. Sarah found herself looking forward to his visits more than she cared to admit. There was something comforting about his steady presence, the way his deep voice filled their small cabin, how he always asked about her day before starting Micah's lesson. By early October, Micah was reading simple sentences and doing basic arithmetic. Sarah watched with pride as he worked through his lessons, but also with a twinge of sadness. Soon he wouldn't need these lessons anymore, and Patrick's visits would end. One Tuesday, as Patrick was preparing to leave, a sudden downpour began. Thunder cracked overhead and the sky turned an ominous green-black. "You can't ride in this," Sarah said, peering out at the driving rain. "It's too dangerous." Patrick hesitated by the door. "I don't want to impose." "It's not imposing if I'm inviting you," Sarah replied firmly. "We have a spare pallet. You can leave at first light." The storm raged through the night, wind howling around the cabin's corners. Sarah lay awake, acutely aware of Patrick sleeping just across the room, of his steady breathing mingling with Micah's softer snores. In the morning, she found him already awake, stoking the fire and putting coffee on to boil. "Hope you don't mind," he said when he noticed her watching. "Seemed the least I could do." "Not at all." Sarah pulled her shawl tighter around her shoulders, suddenly self-conscious in her nightdress and loose braid. Thank you. They worked together preparing breakfast, moving around each other in the small space with surprising ease. When Micah woke, he was delighted to find Patrick still there, full of questions about thunderstorms and whether the deputy had ever been struck by lightning. As Patrick prepared to leave, the morning sun breaking through the clouds, Sarah found herself reluctant to see him go. The Harvest Festival is next weekend in town, he said, adjusting his saddle. Thought you and Micah might enjoy it. I could escort you if you'd like. Sarah hesitated. They rarely went to town except for absolute necessities. I don't know. There'll be a spelling bee, Patrick added with a twinkle in his eye. Micah could show off his new skills. Can we go, Mama, please? Micah's face was alight with excitement, looking at her son's hopeful expression and then at Patrick's kind eyes. Sarah found herself nodding. I suppose we could use a day of fun. The Copper Creek Harvest Festival was everything Micah had dreamed of and more. The town square was decorated with autumn bunting, food stalls offered treats they rarely indulged in, and games and contests kept everyone entertained. Sarah felt awkward at first, aware of curious glances from townspeople who rarely saw the widow Prescott. But Patrick stayed close by, introducing them to people with easy confidence, his hand occasionally brushing the small of her back in a gesture that felt both protective and possessive. Micah entered the children's spelling bee, and though he didn't win, he correctly spelled 3 words before being eliminated, earning a proud hug from his mother and a congratulatory handshake from Patrick. As afternoon turned to evening, a fiddler struck up a lively tune and couples began to dance in the cleared area near the bandstand. May I have this dance? Patrick asked, extending his hand to Sarah. She shook her head. I haven't danced since James. I understand, he said gently. Perhaps another time, but as they watched the dancers, Micah tugged at Sarah's skirt. Mama, you used to dance with Pa all the time. He said you were the best dancer in 3 counties. Sarah smiled at the memory. Did he now? You should dance with Deputy Patrick, Micah continued innocently. Pa wouldn't want you to forget how. Sarah looked at her son, then at Patrick, who was carefully not pressuring her. The music changed to a slower waltz and something in her chest loosened. One dance, she said, taking Patrick's offered hand. His palm was warm against hers as he led her to the edge of the dancing area. When his other hand settled respectfully at her waist, Sarah felt a shiver that had nothing to do with the cool evening air. I'm probably quite rusty, she warned as they began to move. You're perfect, Patrick replied, his voice low enough that only she could hear. They moved together as if they'd been dancing for years, her skirts swishing around their legs, his steady guidance making her feel graceful despite her practical boots and simple dress. Sarah couldn't remember the last time she'd felt so light, so aware of herself as a woman rather than just a mother or a farmer. As the music drew to a close, Patrick slowed their steps but didn't immediately release her. In the lantern light, his eyes were dark and intent on hers. Sarah, he began, but was interrupted by Micah running up to them. Can we have apple pie now, you promised? The moment broken, Sarah stepped back, smoothing her skirts with hands that weren't quite steady. Yes, of course. Let's get some pie. Later, as Patrick drove them home in a borrowed wagon, Micah fell asleep against Sarah's side, exhausted from the excitement. The night was clear, stars scattered like diamond dust across the sky. Thank you for today, Sarah said softly. It's been a long time since we've had such fun. Patrick glanced at her, his profile strong in the moonlight. It was my pleasure, truly. They rode in comfortable silence for a while, the wagon's gentle rocking and the rhythmic clip-clop of the horses' hooves the only sounds. I want to be honest with you, Sarah, Patrick said finally. My interest in teaching Micah isn't entirely selfless, Sarah tensed. What do you mean? He kept his eyes on the road. I've grown fond of you both, more than fond. I know it's only been a few months and you may not be ready, but I wanted you to know that my intentions are honorable. Sarah's heart hammered in her chest. She'd suspected his feelings might be deepening, had felt her own doing the same, but hearing him say it aloud made it real in a frightening way. Patrick, you don't need to say anything now, he interrupted gently. I understand you might need time. I just wanted to be clear about where I stand. They reached the cabin, and Patrick carried the sleeping Micah inside while Sarah lit the lamps. When the boy was tucked into bed, they stood awkwardly by the door. "Will you still come on Tuesday?" Sarah asked, suddenly afraid he might withdraw his offer of lessons now that his feelings were in the open. "If you'll have me," he replied simply. Sarah nodded, not trusting herself to speak. As Patrick stepped out into the night, he turned back. "Sleep well, Sarah." "You too, Patrick," she whispered, watching until he disappeared into the darkness. The following weeks brought a subtle shift in their interactions. Patrick continued Micah's lessons with the same dedication, but there was a new awareness between him and Sarah, a current of unspoken possibility that charged the air whenever their eyes met or their hands accidentally touched. November arrived with bitter winds and the promise of an early winter. Patrick began bringing extra firewood on his visits, splitting logs with powerful strokes that Sarah couldn't help but admire from the kitchen window. One Friday, as Patrick was working with Micah on multiplication tables, a rider appeared, bringing news that cattle rustlers had been spotted nearby. Patrick had to cut the lesson short, his expression grim as he checked his pistol before mounting up. "Be careful," Sarah said, standing on the porch as he prepared to leave. "These men sound dangerous." "I will." He hesitated, then reached down to squeeze her hand briefly. "Lock your doors tonight. I'll come by tomorrow if I can, let you know what happened." Sarah watched him ride away, fear clutching at her heart in a way that told her exactly how much she'd come to care for him. That night, as promised, she locked the doors and kept the rifle close. Micah sensed her tension and was unusually quiet as they prepared for bed. Outside, the wind howled mournfully around the cabin's corners. A sudden pounding at the door startled them both. Sarah grabbed the rifle, motioning for Micah to hide under the bed. "Who's there?" she called, heart racing. "Sarah, it's me." Patrick's voice was strained. "I need help." She rushed to unlock the door. Patrick stumbled in, one hand pressed to his side, blood seeping between his fingers. "Oh God," Sarah gasped, helping him to a chair. "What happened?" "Caught up to the rustlers," he grimaced as she helped him remove his coat. "One of them got lucky with a knife." Sarah worked quickly, cutting away his blood-soaked shirt to reveal a nasty gash along his ribs. It was deep but clean, missing any vital organs. "Micah, bring me the whiskey from the cupboard and the sewing kit," she instructed, her voice steadier than she felt. As she cleaned and stitched the wound, Patrick watched her face, jaw clenched against the pain. "You've done this before." "My father was a doctor," she explained, concentrating on making neat stitches. "I assisted him sometimes. Hold still now." When she finished, Patrick's face was pale but the bleeding had stopped. "Thank you," he said weakly. "I didn't know where else to go. Town was too far." "You did right to come here," Sarah said firmly, washing blood from her hands. "You're in no condition to travel further tonight." She made up the spare pallet again, but this time with extra blankets against the November chill. Micah, wide-eyed but brave, helped bring water and kindling to build up the fire. In the morning, Sarah found Patrick feverish, his skin hot to the touch. The wound showed angry red streaks infection setting in despite her careful cleaning. "We need to get you to a proper doctor," she said, worry etching her features. Patrick shook his head. "Can't ride, you'd have to go for help." Sarah bit her lip, thinking hard. Town was 15 miles away, a journey she couldn't make quickly enough on foot with winter coming on. Their nearest neighbor, the Hendersons, lived 5 miles east, but Mr. Henderson was nearly 70 and couldn't be expected to ride for the doctor either. "I'll have to go myself," she decided. "Micah can stay with you." Patrick caught her wrist, his grip weak but insistent. "Too dangerous." "The rustlers are long gone by now if they have any sense," Sarah countered. "And you need medicine." Despite Patrick's protests, Sarah prepared to ride. She hadn't been on horseback since James died, having sold their second horse to pay for food that first desperate winter. But Patrick's mare was gentle enough, and necessity overrode her apprehension. "Listen carefully, Micah," she instructed her son. "Keep cold compresses on Deputy Patrick's forehead. Make sure he drinks water whenever he wakes. Can you do that?" Micah nodded solemnly. "Yes, Mama." "I'll take care of him." "I'll be back before dark," Sarah promised, though she knew it would be close. The ride to town was grueling. Cold wind cut through Sarah's coat, and the unfamiliar horse was skittish under her rusty guidance. But determination drove her forward, the thought of Patrick growing weaker spurring her on when her muscles screamed for rest. In Copper Creek, she went straight to Dr. Wilson's office, barely taking time to hitch the horse before pounding on his door. Mrs. Prescott. The doctor's surprise at seeing her was evident. "What brings you to town?" "Deputy Blackwood is at my cabin with a knife wound that's gone bad," Sarah explained breathlessly. "He needs medicine, maybe help I can't give." The doctor's eyebrows rose at the news of the deputy's whereabouts, but he asked no questions as he gathered supplies. "I'll ride back with you. Give me 10 minutes to saddle up." The return journey seemed even longer, with Sarah's anxiety mounting with every mile. What if Patrick had worsened in her absence? What if Micah couldn't manage alone? When they finally reached the cabin, Sarah practically fell from the horse in her haste to get inside. She found Micah diligently placing a fresh, wet cloth on Patrick's forehead, just as she'd instructed. "Mama." "You're back," Micah exclaimed, relief evident in his voice. "Deputy Patrick's been talking funny, saying things that don't make sense." Dr. Wilson took charge immediately, examining the wound and administering medicines from his bag. "Infection's setting in, but we've caught it in time. He'll need careful nursing for a few days. He can stay here," Sarah said without hesitation. "I'll look after him." The doctor gave her instructions for changing bandages and administering the medicines he left, along with warnings about signs that would indicate a worsening condition. "I'll try to check back in a few days," he said, preparing to leave. "But with this weather coming in, I can't promise. You may be on your own." After the doctor left, Sarah settled in for what she knew would be a long night. Patrick drifted in and out of consciousness, sometimes lucid enough to thank her, other times lost in fever dreams that had him calling out names she didn't recognize. During one brief period of clarity, he grasped her hand. "Sorry to be such trouble," he whispered. Sarah smoothed back his damp hair. "Hush now, you're no trouble. Been wanting to tell you something," he continued, his eyes fever bright but focused on her face. "Been falling in love with you, Sarah Prescott. Bit more every day." Sarah's breath caught in her throat. She knew fever could loosen a man's tongue, make him say things he might not otherwise, but the simple sincerity in his voice told her this was no delirium-induced confession. "Rest now," she said softly, pressing a cool cloth to his brow. "We'll talk when you're stronger." That night, as the wind picked up and the first snowflakes began to fall, Sarah kept vigil by Patrick's side. Micah eventually fell asleep on his own bed, exhausted from the day's events. In the quiet darkness, Sarah allowed herself to examine her feelings. She'd been so determined to remain independent, to prove she could survive on her own, that she'd nearly convinced herself she didn't need anyone. But these past months with Patrick had awakened something she thought had died with James: the desire for companionship, for partnership, for love. The realization should have frightened her, but instead it brought a strange peace. Whatever happened next, she couldn't deny the truth of her heart any longer. The snowstorm that began that night continued for 3 days, effectively isolating the small cabin from the outside world. Sarah divided her time between caring for Patrick, whose fever finally broke on the 2nd day, and keeping the cabin warm and Micah occupied. By the 4th day, Patrick was well enough to sit up and take broth. The color had returned to his face, though he remained weak from his ordeal. "Thank you," he said as Sarah changed his bandage. "For everything. You likely saved my life." "Consider it payment for all those reading lessons," she replied lightly, though her hands trembled slightly as they brushed his bare skin. Micah, delighted to have his teacher on the mend, brought his slate to show Patrick the sums he'd been practicing. "Very good," Patrick praised, his voice still weak but his smile genuine. "You've been working hard while I've been lazy in bed." "Mama says you're not lazy, you're healing," Micah corrected seriously. "And that we have to be patient because you got hurt protecting people." Patrick's eyes met Sarah's over the boy's head. "Your mama is very wise." That evening, after Micah was asleep, Sarah sat beside Patrick's pallet, mending by the firelight while he watched her with half-lidded eyes. "The doctor should be able to get through tomorrow if the weather holds," she said, breaking a comfortable silence. He can take you back to town." Patrick's expression clouded. "Eager to be rid of me?" "No," Sarah answered honestly, "but you'd be more comfortable in your own quarters, I imagine. I'm pretty comfortable right where I am." His hand found hers, stilling her needlework. "Sarah, about what I said during my fever." She tensed, suddenly afraid he would retract his confession, claim it was just the delirium speaking. "You needn't explain. I understand. I meant every word," he interrupted. "I've fallen in love with you, with Micah too, if I'm being honest, and not just because he's a bright student." Sarah's heart pounded so loudly she was certain he must hear it. "Patrick, I know it might be too soon," he continued, his thumb tracing gentle circles on her palm. "And I know you've made a life for yourself and Micah without needing anyone else. I admire that independence. But I'm hoping there might be room in that life for me too." Sarah looked down at their joined hands, then back to his earnest face. "When James died, I thought that part of my life was over. I had to focus on survival, on Micah. I couldn't allow myself to need anyone. And now—" Patrick's voice was barely above a whisper. "Now I find that I do need someone. You." The admission felt both terrifying and freeing. "I've fallen in love with you too, Patrick Blackwood." The smile that broke across his face was like sunrise after the longest night. He tugged gently on her hand until she leaned down, and then his lips found hers in a kiss that was tender yet charged with promise. When they parted, both slightly breathless, Patrick kept hold of her hand. "I don't want to rush you, Sarah. We can take this as slow as you need." Sarah nodded, grateful for his understanding. "Thank you. For now, let's just focus on getting you well." The weather improved enough the next day for Dr. Wilson to make his promised visit. He pronounced Patrick on the mend, but advised against traveling back to town for at least another week. "That wound needs to heal more before you jostle it on horseback," he said firmly. "Mrs. Prescott, I trust you can continue to look after our deputy." "Of course," Sarah replied, ignoring the knowing glance the doctor sent between her and Patrick. As winter settled over the land, Patrick's daily presence in their small cabin began to feel natural, right. He regained his strength quickly and insisted on helping with chores as soon as he could stand without dizziness. Micah's reading lessons resumed, and Patrick added practical skills to the curriculum, not tying, simple carpentry, even whittling. One evening, as snow fell softly outside, Patrick cleared his throat nervously during supper. "I've been thinking," he began, setting down his fork. "My position as deputy comes with quarters in town, but I've never much liked living so close to everyone." Sarah looked up, sensing the conversation's importance. "Oh, I've been saving to buy some land," he continued. "There's a nice piece available just over the ridge from here. Good water, decent soil, not too far from town for my duties, but far enough for privacy." Micah perked up. "Are you going to build a house, Deputy Patrick?" "That's my plan," Patrick confirmed, his eyes on Sarah. "But a house needs a family to make it a home." Sarah's heart skipped. "Patrick." He reached across the table for her hand. "I know this isn't the most romantic setting, but I can't wait any longer. Sarah Prescott, would you and Micah do me the honor of becoming my family? Will you marry me?" Micah gasped, then bounced in his seat. "Say yes, Mama, say yes." Sarah looked at Patrick's hopeful face, then at her son's excited one. The love she felt for both of them welled up, overwhelming in its intensity. "Yes," she said, voice steady despite the tears gathering in her eyes. "Yes, we will." The smile that lit Patrick's face rivaled the summer sun for brightness. He rose from his chair and came around the table, pulling Sarah to her feet and into his arms. His kiss was gentle but filled with promise, mindful of Micah's presence but leaving no doubt of his feelings. Micah clapped his hands. "Does this mean Deputy Patrick will live with us forever?" Sarah laughed, wiping happy tears from her cheeks. "It does, sweetheart. If that's all right with you." "It's more than all right," Micah declared, throwing his arms around both of them. "Now you can teach me to read every day," Patrick chuckled, ruffling the boy's hair. "That and much more, son. That and much more." The wedding took place in early spring, once the snow had melted enough for travel. It was a small ceremony in Copper Creek's modest church, attended by the few neighbors from outlying farms and the townspeople who had come to respect the deputy and the determined widow. Sarah wore a new dress of pale blue calico, with wildflowers in her hair that Micah had insisted on picking himself. Patrick, standing tall and handsome in his best suit, watched her walk down the aisle with an expression of such naked adoration that several women in the congregation dabbed at their eyes. Micah stood proudly beside them, holding the simple gold bands they would exchange. When the minister pronounced them husband and wife, the boy was the first to cheer, his joy infectious as it spread through the small gathering. The celebration afterward was modest but joyful, with music and dancing in the town hall and plenty of food contributed by well-wishers. Sarah danced with her new husband without hesitation this time, secure in his arms and in their shared future. As evening fell, they prepared to leave for their new home, a small but sturdy cabin Patrick had built on his land over the winter months, with help from neighbors and Sarah herself. They had decided to keep Sarah's homestead as well, using it for additional crops and eventually a small cattle operation. "Ready to see your new home?" Patrick asked Micah, lifting the sleepy boy onto the wagon seat between himself and Sarah. "Will my books be there?" Micah asked, yawning. "All of them," Patrick assured him, "and a special shelf just for them in your new room." As they drove through the gathering darkness, Sarah leaned her head against Patrick's shoulder, contentment washing through her. The path ahead wouldn't always be easy life in the Montana Territory, never was, but they would face it together, as a family. Their new cabin welcomed them with windows glowing warmly from the lamps Patrick had asked a neighbor to light before their arrival. Inside, everything was simple but thoughtfully arranged, with touches that spoke of Patrick's attention to Sarah's preferences: shelves for her mother's dishes, hooks by the door positioned at her height, a rocking chair by the hearth just like the one at her old cabin. After settling an exhausted Micah in his new room, Sarah found Patrick standing by the fire, waiting for her with a small package in his hands. "A wedding gift," he explained, holding it out to her. "I hope you like it." Sarah unwrapped the brown paper to find a beautiful leather-bound book, a journal, its pages blank and waiting. "For our story," Patrick said softly. "I thought you might want to write it down for Micah and maybe for others who might come along someday." Sarah ran her fingers over the smooth cover, touched by the thoughtfulness of the gift. "It's perfect, thank you." Patrick pulled her into his arms, his kiss deeper now that they were alone. When they parted, he pressed his forehead to hers. "I love you, Mrs. Blackwood." The new name sent a thrill through her. "And I love you, Mr. Blackwood." That night, as they lay together in their new bed, Sarah reflected on the unexpected turns her life had taken. Just a year ago, she had been a struggling widow, determined to survive on her own but unsure of the future. Now she was a wife again, still independent but no longer alone, with a partner who respected her strength while offering his own to complement it. "What are you thinking about?" Patrick murmured, his fingers tracing lazy patterns on her bare shoulder. "About how teaching Micah to read led me to you," Sarah replied, snuggling closer. "About how sometimes the best things come from the most ordinary beginnings." "There's nothing ordinary about you, Sarah Blackwood," Patrick said, pressing a kiss to her temple. "Nothing at all." Summer bloomed across the land, bringing long days of work balanced by peaceful evenings on the porch, watching Micah chase fireflies while Patrick read aloud from one of his many books. Their two homesteads flourished under their combined care, with crops growing strong and a small herd of cattle grazing on the richer pastures of Sarah's original property. Patrick continued his duties as deputy, but arranged his patrols to keep him close to home most nights. Sarah found a balance between maintaining her independence, still managing much of the farming herself, and embracing the partnership of marriage. As autumn approached, Sarah confirmed what she had suspected for several weeks: she was expecting a child. When she told Patrick, his joy was boundless. He lifted her off her feet in a careful embrace, then dropped to his knees to press a reverent kiss to her still flat stomach. "Hello in there," he whispered. "Your mama and I can't wait to meet you." Telling Micah was equally rewarding. The boy's eyes widened with wonder at the news that he would be a big brother. "Will it be a boy or a girl?" he asked, placing a small hand on Sarah's belly. "We won't know until the baby arrives," Sarah explained. "Would you have a preference?" Micah considered this seriously. "A brother would be nice for playing, But a sister would be nice too, so I could teach her things like Deputy Patrick, Pa teaches me. Patrick's eyes grew suspiciously bright at Micah's casual use of pa, a term the boy had only recently begun to use. Either way, you'll be a wonderful big brother, he assured the boy. Winter came again, harsher than the previous year, but finding them well prepared with a snug home, full pantry, and hearts warmed by anticipation of the spring's new arrival. Patrick was even more attentive during Sarah's pregnancy, taking on extra chores and fussing over her comfort in ways that sometimes made her laugh, but always made her feel cherished. Micah's reading progressed remarkably under Patrick's continued tutelage. By Christmas, he was reading simple chapter books on his own, proudly sharing stories with his parents in the evenings. "You're a natural teacher," Sarah told Patrick one night as they prepared for bed. "Have you ever thought of going back to it?" Patrick considered the question. "I've been thinking about it, actually. Copper Creek's growing. They'll need a proper school soon, not just the minister teaching part-time." "You'd be wonderful," Sarah said, meaning it, "and it would keep you closer to home." "Something to consider for the future," Patrick agreed, his hand resting on the swell of her belly where their child grew. "For now, I'm content exactly where I am." Spring arrived with its promise of renewal, and with it came their daughter, Margaret Rose Blackwood, born on a clear April morning with Dr. Wilson in attendance, and Patrick holding Sarah's hand through every moment of labor. "She's perfect," Patrick whispered, cradling the tiny bundle with tears streaming unashamedly down his face. "Just like her mother." Micah approached the bed cautiously, curious but a little overwhelmed by the tiny red-faced infant. "She's so small," he observed. "But she'll grow," Sarah assured him, making room for him to sit beside her. "And she'll need her big brother to help her learn everything you know." Micah's chest puffed with importance. "I can teach her to read when she's bigger." "I'm counting on it," Sarah said, exchanging a loving glance with Patrick over their children's heads. Life settled into a new rhythm with baby Margaret Maggie, as they soon began calling her at its center. Patrick did indeed take the position as Copper Creek's schoolteacher when it was offered that summer, reducing his deputy duties to occasional assistance when needed. The change meant more regular hours and winters at home rather than patrolling in dangerous weather. By Maggie's first birthday, the Blackwood family had expanded their house to accommodate their growing needs, adding a proper schoolroom where Patrick could tutor advanced students after regular school hours, and where Sarah taught Micah when winter weather prevented the trip to town. On a warm evening in late summer, as they sat on their porch watching the sunset paint the sky in brilliant oranges and pinks, Micah reading to little Maggie while she babbled happily in response, Sarah leaned against Patrick's shoulder with a contented sigh. "Happy?" he asked, his arm tightening around her. "Completely," she replied honestly. "I never imagined this life was possible after James died. I thought I'd always be alone, struggling just to get by. And I never thought I'd find someone like you," Patrick said, pressing a kiss to her temple. "Someone strong enough to stand on her own, but willing to let me stand beside her." Sarah turned to face him fully. "Do you ever regret it, giving up the excitement of being a full-time lawman for teaching and farming?" Patrick's laugh was warm and genuine. "Not for a single moment." "This," he gestured to their home, their children, the life they'd built together. "This is worth more than any badge or adventure." As darkness fell gently around them, stars appearing one by one in the vast Montana sky, Sarah reflected on the journey that had brought them here. From a widow teaching her son alone to a woman who had opened her heart to love again. From a deputy offering reading lessons to a man who had found his true calling and his true home. "I love you, Patrick Blackwood," she said softly. "Thank you for teaching us both in more ways than you know." His answer was in his kiss, in the strength of his embrace. In the future they continued to build together a future founded on a simple offer made on a dusty porch when a cowboy said, "Let me teach him too." 5 years later, the Blackwood home was a center of learning and love for the entire community. Patrick's reputation as a teacher had grown, drawing students from neighboring homesteads who stayed with them during the week to attend his classes. Sarah, with her natural organizational skills, managed the expanded household while continuing to run their prosperous farm. Micah, now 11, was Patrick's unofficial assistant, helping younger children with their letters and numbers. His pride in this role was evident in his careful attention to each student, mirroring the patience Patrick had shown him years ago. Maggie, a spirited 5-year-old with her mother's determination and her father's green eyes, was just beginning her own formal lessons, though she had already learned much simply by being immersed in the learning environment of their home. The newest addition to their family, 3-year-old James Patrick Blackwood, toddled among the older children, already fascinated by books and the mysterious symbols inside them. On this particular autumn afternoon, as golden light streamed through the schoolroom windows and the scent of Sarah's apple pies cooling in the kitchen wafted through the house, Patrick looked up from the essay he was correcting to find Sarah watching him from the doorway, a soft smile on her face. "What is it?" he asked, setting down his pencil. "Just thinking about how far we've come," she replied, crossing to perch on the edge of his desk. "Remember when teaching Micah to read seemed like an impossible task?" Patrick smiled, taking her hand in his. "And now look at him. Teaching others, just like his father." "Just like both his fathers," Sarah corrected gently. James Prescott might be gone, but his love of learning lived on in his son, and Sarah made sure Micah never forgot the father who had given him life. Patrick nodded, understanding as always. "Both his fathers would be proud, as I am." Sarah leaned down to kiss him lightly. "The children from the Henderson place are staying for supper. Mrs. Henderson sent word that she's feeling poorly." "We'll make room," Patrick said easily. Their table often expanded to include whoever needed a place, just as their hearts had expanded to embrace the community around them. That evening, as they gathered around the long table Patrick had built the previous winter, Sarah looked at the faces illuminated by lamplight, her children, the visiting students, and Patrick at the head of the table, leading them all in a simple prayer of thanks. This was the legacy they were building together, not just a family or a farm, but a place where learning and love went hand in hand, where children grew in knowledge and character under their care. Later, after the children were in bed and the house was quiet, Sarah and Patrick sat by the fire, his arm around her shoulders as she worked on mending, and he read from a new book that had arrived on the last stagecoach. "I received a letter from the Territorial Education Board today," Patrick said, setting aside his book. "They've asked me to consider taking on a larger role helping establish curriculum standards for schools throughout the territory." Sarah looked up from her sewing. "That sounds like an important position. It would mean some travel," Patrick continued, watching her reaction carefully. "Not extensive, but periodic visits to Helena and other larger settlements. You should accept," Sarah said without hesitation. "Your methods deserve to be shared more widely." Patrick smiled, relieved but not surprised by her support. "I'd want you involved too. Your practical approach to education, especially for girls, is something the territory needs." Sarah considered this, needle pausing mid-stitch. "I hadn't thought about it that way." "You're as much a teacher as I am," Patrick said earnestly. "The way you've taught our children and the neighboring children about farming, household management, medicinal plants, that's valuable education." Sarah felt a flush of pleasure at his recognition. "I suppose it is." "So you'll help me if I accept?" Patrick asked, though he already knew the answer. "Of course," Sarah replied, setting aside her mending to face him fully. "We're partners in everything, aren't we?" Patrick pulled her closer, pressing a kiss to her forehead. "Always and forever, Mrs. Blackwood." As they sat together in the warmth of their home, surrounded by the books and learning tools that had brought them together, Sarah reflected on the journey that had begun with a simple offer of help from a kind-hearted deputy. That offer had grown into a life richer and more fulfilling than she could have imagined during those dark, lonely days after James's death. From teaching a boy to read alone, to building a family and a legacy of learning that would touch countless lives across the Montana Territory, all because a cowboy had said, "Let me teach him too."